Greetings, everybody, and welcome to a special edition of City Lights Live, the virtual component of the City Lights events calendar. I am your host, Peter Maravelis, and today we are honored to have with us Tarek El-Ariss, celebrating the publication of his new book, Water on Fire, a Memoir of War. It is published by our friends over at The Other Press. It is a remarkable account of growing up in a Beirut devastated by the Lebanese Civil War. It is the story of immigration, a series of displacements that take the author from Europe and Africa to towns across the northeastern US, and finally to New York City on 9/11. It is a story of loss, but also of the regaining of agency and personal evolution. Professor El-Ariss explores how we live with trauma, exploring the profound impact of war on our perception of the world. With great humor, courage, irreverence, and insight, he takes us on a journey that is at once historical and universal, intellectual and introspective, weaving together some remarkable stories in the process. His prose is beautifully evocative and eloquently written. This is a gem of a book, and City Lights is delighted to be able to explore it with him in conversation. Tarek El-Ariss is the James Wright Professor and Chair of Middle Eastern Studies at Dartmouth College, and one of our country's leading voices in Middle Eastern studies. Trained in philosophy, comparative literature, and visual and cultural studies, he is the author of Trials of Arab Modernity, Literary Effects, and the New Political, and the book Leaks, Hacks, and Scandals, Arab Culture in the Digital Age. He's also the editor of the MLA anthology, The Arab Renaissance, a bilingual anthology of Nada. He is a Guggenheim Fellow and previously has taught at the University of Texas in Austin. He has lectured widely on such topics as Arabic literature, culture and the arts, literary theory, new media and digital humanities, travel writing and the war novel, and science fiction and utopia studies, and much, much more. Professor El-Ariss, welcome to our program, and congratulations on this exceptional work. And it's really a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you. This is such an honor and a pleasure, and I'm a big fan of City Lights and all the programming they do. So this means a lot to me. I'm very happy to be here.
So to begin with, I would like to consider a passage that's located at the end of the book so as to consider our possibilities for new beginnings. The quote goes, "To survive, I had to learn to cohabit with war, to be like water. From the beach of Beirut to wherever I am now, I had to accept that water burns and keeps me warm, that war is a traumatizing experience and a way of life." So let's begin by talking about how events shape us. How does one negotiate with history? And very importantly, to paraphrase the words of the late Rafik El-Harari, how does one exit war and enter into the future?
Well, I mean, this is part of what I'm saying is that you don't exit war, that you live with war, and the way and war is really becomes a way of life. It becomes a condition. It conditions you. It shapes your subjectivity. It shapes your development. And I was born like 2 years before the start of the war. So all I knew, and for 15 years, like all the formative years were really shaped by that experience, by the uncertainty, by the displacement, by the all the things that this kind of ongoing conflict. So there is no, for me, what I realized at the end, I mean, I've been through analysis in the early 20s in New York City, but also when I write this book, it's after COVID starts, and so I have to go back on the couch and revisit it through this form of writing, through this form of engagement. So what I realize at the end is that war keeps coming back. It is this kind of constant return, and how do we deal with it? It's a return that hurts, that is painful, but in a way it is strangely also comforting, because it is the return of home. It is the return to a home in a very perverse way that is both gives you the sense of belonging and the normalcy that that we are accustomed to. But this normalcy is the normalcy of war. And I remember as a kid, like when we used to leave for a while, like we used to go, for little breaks here and there, and the quiet and the order was always very bizarre to me, even as a child. That there was something eerie about that which is not, the traffic lights. I mean, we did not have traffic. I mean, we had them, they existed, but they never functioned. And there is a chaos, of course, like war, the Beirut I grew up in, the West Beirut that I grew up in. I mean, it's of course it became famous. People refer to it as, oh, this was Beirut, right? Like it entered the English language as synonymous with a form of collapse of social and political order. So it is not like it is something that really structures you at a very fundamental level. And this is what I feel like is this is it structures you, and it traumatizes you, but at the same time it gives you the normalcy that you have gotten accustomed to. And so what is the outside to this? And of course the end of, the end, quote unquote, the end of the war in 1990. I mean, I kind of say the war never really ends. At least for me, it never really ends. Is that okay? Let's clean all the rubble, let's rebuild, and let's enter into the future, right? This is the rebuilding project of Solidaire, of, after, in the 90s. And of course, for a lot of people, this was like, how do you, it's sci-fi for a lot of us, right? Like it is a break with any kind of experience of being in that place. And there is a chapter in the book, when I go to college, this, from 91 to 94 in Beirut, so really at the end of, right after the end of the war. And we're kind of, we're being reacclimated to think that actually we're not going to be kidnapped if we cross to the other side of town, or that. So it is all about trying to rediscover ourselves and reinvent ourselves in this kind of post-war environment, and with all the ambivalence of that, and how we miss the smell of the garbage. And I mean, so it is something that structures also your sensorial being. It's the sounds of bullets, the sounds of bombs. It is the smell. It is the kind of the way streets are structured, the cars on the sidewalk. Not, I mean, they're still on the sidewalk in Beirut now. I mean, it's not like we that didn't stop. But so multiple levels of sensorial stimuli that pretty much shapes the subject. And now what do you do after? So how do you keep them with you as kind of an internal also structure that continues to shape your experience of the world outside of that place and outside of that experience?
Yeah. The text of this book evoked for me such a Deleuzian headspace, I have to be honest. And it got me thinking about the nomadic nature of knowledge and identity. And I was also struck by your relationship to time, and how time is of the essence, and your essence being composed of the insights derived from movement through time and space, and these just amazing events that border on the surreal. And so can we talk about the essential?
Mhm. Yeah. I mean, really, I mean, in the end, I say it's like a video game, right? The time is never a time. You distrust time. Time has to always be somehow reinvented or reactivated, because there is a breakdown in the very linearity of time that allows you to think the future and think of yourself into the future. So the temporality of war, it's a breakdown in your ability to think yourself into the future. And if you can't do that, It means you can't plan, you can't invest, you can't work for your retirement. I mean, none of these things that are essential if we think of in normal quote unquote societies where, when am I going to retire, or what I'm going to do next year, or even this summer or next month, because that time is broken, right? It's broken by the uncertainty of violence. Like anything can happen tomorrow, and then there's no school, or the airport closes, and then everything you've planned is really is not feasible anymore. So you're kind of living in that constant, so you have to invent a different kind of perception of time that accounts for this uncertainty. And so how do you coexist with that, and how does that time really becomes the way becomes the organizing principle of how you project yourself into the world?
Yeah.
And I say it's almost like, you move to a city, and then of course you move to a house, and you're already planning to move to the other one, because at some point this house is going to burn down, or is going to be shelled, or a bomb is gonna, something about that stability is never really stable. It is only, it's kind of it bears within it the movement into something else. So the nomadic is really the kind of, is really the framework here for understanding movement and experience of time. And so there is a fundamental distrust of again, what seems normal, or what seems kind of like the normal flow that we actually need to imagine ourselves as coherent subjects, as having some sort of coherent sense of who we are, and how we are in relation to others, and how we are in the future. So the essential is precisely this this recognition of that fugitivity of time. And this is where, and I've written actually about it as a, it's, I wrote this piece called Holding Time, and where I go to the Arabian Nights, and it's like you have, and the time that Oedipus has, so he can solve the riddle and save Thebes. And it's the time also where, that you have to answer the genie who's there with the sword trying to kill you because you threw a pit of dates. So you're living in that in that kind of temporality that is never stable, that you can never trust.
Yeah.
And what does that do to the subject, and what does that do to how you are in the world? So this is kind of my understanding of time and movement in the book that I try to activate.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up, the Arabian Nights, because, the subject of the ghoul, or the genie, or and I know you've spoken about this in reference to the virtual a lot. And now we have, cancel culture, and the endless trolls that emerge from seemingly nowhere. They're almost anonymous sometimes, and then you wonder how many of them are AI and virtual, and how many of them are human beings. But there is this, it is almost an otherworldly dimension to this. It's that we're going back to the archaic, really, in some ways.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this is where my previous book, the book on digital culture, this is where it ends. I say, because how can you understand the digital if you don't understand the archaic? I mean, to understand the digital, it is to go back to pre-Islamic tribal raids as form of cyber raiding today playing out online. So and but it is also a space of performance, of choosing the persona that you want for yourself. And it could be like, a warrior from a certain time. It could be, so we're in this space of the phantasmatic. And we need to understand these performances. We really need to go back and look at these references. So if you're a scholar of media, you have to also be a scholar of classical Arabic literature, or ancient history, or whatever it is, to understand how these two are coming together. And so this is, this is and I end the book by saying I'm gonna go into the portal to retrieve this archaic and face these monsters. And of course, little did I know that the monsters also live in my head. And the monsters are also the monsters of the Lebanese Civil War.
Yeah,
So the monster is in you.
which brings us to the place of the other in your
Yes,
work, and because it comes into figure in the text in very, very important ways, and in war in relationship to the other, um because like you say, it's something that also, is within us.
yeah,
And when we resist, when we create phantasms that sort of resist, it makes things worse in many ways.
absolutely, absolutely. And for me, the question of the other, again, it is like, I come from Lebanon. It's a civil war, right? I mean, the other is how do you think of the other? The other, is it the other from a different sect, from the other part of town, and the other as, the other that is the alienation that makes you who you are as well, in a very fundamental way. So the whole book plays on this notion of the constitution of the subject. How do we think? How are we formed in a very fundamental way? I mean, of course, there is the parental, there is, but also there is the enemy. But there is also the inside. There are the creatures that live with you, that come out of your skin. I mean, there are all these episodes about infestations, which I'll be happy to read some to give, to give the audience a little taste of that. But so this other, I mean, the other here is also related to the one, and the one is also alone and doesn't want to be alone. And so the other is a necessity, as a kind of a dialectic with this one that, even though is very happy to escape the war and the infestation, but also is so happy to have it because it keeps him warm and while it burns him at the same time. And this is the kind of this kind of dual dual levels where water warms me, but also it makes my skin break. And this is the chapter, when I come to the US, when I come to upstate New York, and I'm taking these hot showers every day, and I have no idea what's happening to me. And I never, I mean, we didn't have hot water every day. I mean, actually, we had very little water. And when you had water, you didn't shower every day because, you needed to warm the water up. And it was an event to warm it up. And it was like maybe every few days or something. And you had to like wash up, uh, with a hand towel. So the idea of bathing, of water, again, it's that warming and burning that I see in the book, and that I kind of follow as an arch.
Yeah. And it's interesting to me how what's happening in the physical is also happening, within us, that it's happening
Yes,
within our psyche.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
So I was thinking this is probably a good time for us to have people experience a little bit of your prose, and also just how luscious and wonderful it is. So if you could be so kind as maybe read an excerpt.
So this is chapter 11. So the book is 12 chapters. This is the one right before. It's upstate New York. It's 1994. I just arrived to start graduate school, and so I talk a little bit about. I mean, it's also starts like here in where I am now at Dartmouth and Hanover, and kind of connects it to that moment. So it's called an Eerie Canal, and of course the Eerie Canal. We think of the Eerie Canal that goes all the way up from New York City to the Great Lakes, right? The highway, the super highway of the 19th century, of that time period. But I write the Erie with double E. So it's supposed to be one E, but I keep it double E. I got a new office overlooking the main quad. It was time to cull, unpack my library. What books can continue the journey with me from Beirut to Abidjan, upstate New York to New York City, and from Austin to Hanover? I was going over my theory books. I picked up one about ghosts, the end of the Cold War, and the return of the repressed. But as I pulled it off the shelf, a note fell out. The note was a short paragraph describing a condition called delusions of parasitosis, also known as delusional infestation. When this rare condition afflicts patients, they become convinced that insects have infested their surroundings, crawling on their skin. Doctors report that patients pick at their skin to produce samples. They may pick up scabs or lint or other items that they consider to be the parasite devouring them. After I found the note, I looked up its origin and discovered that it was a photocopy from the 4th edition of Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, DSM, from the section on psychotic disorders. The note was an old photocopied page, the writing somewhat faded, blurring the top part of the page, but leaving the paragraph intact. One could surmise that the copy had been made in haste on an old copier in a doctor's office in the late 90s. The copy was taken by the doctor himself in between patients toward the end of the day in an office complex overlooking Cayuga Lake in Ithaca, New York. It must have been dark that day. A winter day, no doubt, turning the spacious yet dimly lit office into something akin to a classroom, or one of those rooms used for AA meetings. There was no exam table or scale or blood pressure monitor. The patients came to that room to share, looking for someone to believe them, to acknowledge a pain that kept them from sleeping. The patients spoke of little creatures that came to them under the cover of darkness, so that no one could witness their assault. They even brought evidence of the nightly raids, bits of lint, cocoons of agony. The patients came to tell their stories, to plead with the doctor, to look further, deeper, to send the samples out to labs with sophisticated microscopes that might finally uncover the perpetrator's identity. They spoke nervously. Their jittery speech carried the vibrations of those monstrous drills with which the creatures were poking at their skin at night. They spoke hastily, with their heartbeat reaching speeds and crescendos that would have made the blood pressure monitor burst and break. They were like the survivors of catastrophic events, such as wars and genocides, that were never covered by any media and were now forgotten. The patients came to the doctor's office in a solemn procession, offering bits and pieces of their own flesh. They were exhausted, drained, desperate to make a last stand against the forces of darkness. They were anxious to get rid of those spirits that one could find in the Arabian Nights and in the narratives of the possessed, who seek out mediums and witch doctors for exorcisms and amulets. But what these patients would eventually realize is that to make the drilling stop or learn how to live with it, they needed to enter those portals that were forming on their lacerated skin. They needed to pull at the thread of their cocoons, unwrap them, and retrieve a long history of separation and displacement. The forgotten note from the DSM section on psychosis was a ticket to a journey inside my body into my deepest past. The suitcase was too big. The lady at the check-in counter refused to let it through. She was adamant. I had to wait until my mom and her friend, who were accompanying me to the airport that day, went to the back cellars in the nearby neighborhood to buy me two medium-sized bags. But I wanted the big one. I wanted all my belonging to travel together. I wanted a suitcase in which I could fit, a suitcase that I wished my brothers and sister had when they left for the US for the first time to reunite with their mother. I wished that they had a large suitcase like this one so that I could sneak into it at night without them seeing me, without them wanting to take me. No need for oxygen tanks and special operation commandos to travel in the suitcase. All that one needs is to get into a fetal position and receive nourishments from the tightly packed clothes and books. The books that accompanied me on my journey to America that day included Baudelaire's Flowers of Evil, Marquis de Sade's Philosophy in the Bedroom, Camus' The Rebel, and Freud's Civilization and Its Discontent. I was leaving Lebanon for good. I asked the driver to take the long way to the airport along the beachfront so I could encircle the city one last time, so I could imprint my mind with the view of the sea. I wanted to inhale its smell and preserve it within me, that smell which impregnated my entrails on that day in August would gestate and rise again every summer, tickling my nostrils and connecting me to the place I left behind. I close my eyes and start smelling the algae at low tide, baking in the sun, green and purple algae, wrapped around the rocks like lace and tassel, revealing the holes and crevices where crab and fish seek shelters from the predators of the open sea. The algae and seaweed eggs generate a special kind of pheromones called dictopterins. These pheromones turned me into a creature of the sea, into a creature of desire, answering their mating call every summer, no matter where I am or whom I am with. The smell of the sea rises within me, takes hold of my body, and makes me feel as if the water were splashing me again, leaving little white crystals on my skin once the salt dries out. Every summer, I start smelling the Beirut Sea. Every summer, I start feeling the pointy rocks poke at my feet as I head out to jump into the deep. The pain that I feel when walking on the rocks with bare feet and the seaweed smells of the Beirut Sea are the ingredients of my sensuous being. They reward me for reuniting with them and punish me for replacing them with other smells and bodies of water. A few weeks after my arrival in Rochester, I was invited by a couple of friends to go sailing on Lake Ontario. We picked up sandwiches and drinks and headed up to the lake. It was a cold and cloudy day, nothing like nothing like the seascape I had left behind. As the small boat was cutting through the waves on the windy lake, I began to feel nauseated. I stuck my head out to the side, and the food and whatever else was in those entrails started gushing out. It was like the scene from Brokeback Mountain when Ennis broke down after Jack drove away.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah,
You know, I understand how a publisher has to, frame a book as being a memoir to be able to market it, but there's such a wonderfully and beautifully poetic aspect to this work. And I should say maybe a kind of a poetic guidebook for transformation. Um,
yeah,
and I want to talk a little bit about that.
yeah,
I'm very interested in how you dealt with and transformed anxiety. I mean, as somebody who has also been shaped by traumatic world events, I mean, this carries great meaning for me. Your writing appears to participate in a project of transformation, and then I'd use the word alchemy, really, maybe to describe it. Offering the reader, especially those touched by world events, a
yeah,
way to process, I find great value in your methodology.
Yeah. Thank you, Peter. And I mean, one of the underlying themes of the book is precisely that, is anxiety, and the anxiety that is triggered by by living in circumstances like this. And so the whole question of water and cleanliness, and storing water and organizing and lining up the bottles. I mean, it's all about you know obsessive compulsive behavior that also allows you to regain control when when the control of your life is no longer within your hand. So to come back to the question of time, so the anxiety is precisely that. Like, how do we regain control? How do we, within those little those spaces, the apartment, the cleaning, the organizing, the storing, forms of regaining control when that is no longer possible in a larger context. So it is this turning inward into the body, into the apartment, into the kitchen counter. And this is where the questions of elements becomes really important. That you're not dealing with ideology, you're not dealing with grand narrative, because that has shattered. You're really basically trying to survive by kind of controlling the little elements around you, what's on your skin, what's ingested, what is what. And that that is the process that I follow throughout. I stay close to these elements that are the clothes, the skin, that are, and they are very extremely intimate. These are spaces of intimacy that also we develop. And I talk even about those little creatures that come to me, I mean, they're in my head, but we become friends at the end. We reconcile, and we share the same bed, and this is how you heal. It's not, I mean, of course, you also go to therapy, but we talk about wars, right? How do you make peace with your enemy, and what is this enemy? So this enemy is the one that comes to you at night and is poking you. And how do you say, you know what? You can sleep in my bed, but maybe just let me sleep, and you can also sleep in the bed, and we'll keep each other warm instead of going to war against one another.
Yeah.
And also, like, the filtration, the system of filtration with the bottles. Like, how do you let the water is not clean, but when you let it sit in the bottle, it filtrates itself. And the poison is really in the bottom. It's in the sediments. It is not something you can extract. It's going to stay in the bottle, but you just don't have to drink all the way down to that sediments, because if you do that, then you'll be hurting yourself. And so again, these methods of not so much extracting the impure and separating it and defeating it as if that is possible, but how do we give it a space that doesn't let it overwhelm us? And this is how I deal with, the questions of anxiety, questions of survival, tricks of survival, from the kids all the way to the grown-up.
Yeah. The question of the quest for enjoyment comes into play here too, I think, in very important ways.
Yeah, I mean, again, we come back to the little time you have.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's the little time you have, and that's conditions you in a way. It says, because you don't know, this might be the last dinner, or this might be the last party, and so you're always on the verge of the end.
Yeah. And the way that I think nowadays AI, everything is being quantified so tightly. I mean, living in a place like San Francisco, you feel it so, acutely, is that, every inch of space, is measured, and it's not just the realtors that are, at fault, or anyone particularly is at fault. This is kind of like, it's a way of life, or maybe non-life, that you see now replicated around the world. And I remember when I was watching some of the first footage that was being shown of IDF generals talking about what was happening in Gaza, they showed this map, and I looked at it for a moment. I thought, wait a second, that's a realtor's map.
Mm-hmm.
They're parsing out districts. They're looking at real estate.
Absolutely. I mean, but then again, this is the space that we think of. I mean, how do we inhabit it? I mean, that space is seen in totally different ways, as exactly you're saying. So how do you re-inhabit that space and humanize it with all your with all your trauma and your anxieties? But this is what make the space and allows this relation between space and time as not something that is going to govern the space and turn the space into this object for either development or conquest or erasure. I mean, so again, this going back to the element and these relations of intimacy that I think we need to develop with the shelf and the bottle and the plastic container and so there is a tenderness that has been excluded, and when you are at the verge or when you are come from an experience where you've lost, you keep losing all these things. I mean, all of a sudden the little things become, they become your friends. You play with the plastic, the matchbox cars, and you have to develop these other forms of intimacies that sustain you through the process. And you live with yourself. I mean, I also talk a little bit about Robinson Crusoe, being on the island, being kind of with my books, the bed as like a little island, and there are the books, and I'm reading. And so it's a form of surviving, of learning how to survive. And you have these survival guidebooks, right? I mean, I bought one for my friend who's always afraid of like bat infestation or something like that. So actually I looked, and there are these like great books that tells you how to survive. You go camping, what to take with you, what not to take, how to the windows, what. So in a way, this book is a bit like that, but it's coming from a different time and space and experience. There's no hiking involved. uh, so 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 yeah, but there are all these kind of games that we have to play also. And I say, like, we have to play hide and seek with memory, with the traumatic. Like, how do you bring it and then hide from it as well? So it's never this kind of one model of healing, of bringing everything out to the open as a way of resolving things. This is not the model. And the model is very incremental, it's very playful, it goes around, and it talks to these but it doesn't talk to those for a little bit, and then it reconciles with them. And so it's these constant forms of negotiations that allows me to create also a community of words, community of people, of objects, that I enter into a relation with, and so I don't feel by myself as well. Because again, the question of displacement is this, I talk a lot about it, going, they sent me to Africa, I was 15, then America, I was 20, barely, and upstate New York, all by myself. And so how do you also negotiate all these kind of ruptures that also mess with your sense of belonging, your sense of community, and the kind of bonds that you need to stand on your 2 feet and say, to feel supported, and cared for.
Yeah. Well, you so beautifully articulate so many different things in this book. And I think for those watching today, you're in for a real treat. This is an experience of great depth and beauty, and truly breathtaking. And I really appreciate you taking the time to spend with us today, and really wish you the best, in all your research and all your work and in your life. And we hope to bring you into the store physically someday, so it's not just virtual.
I would love that. With great, great pleasure. Thank you so much, Peter, for the invitation and for this great conversation. I really enjoyed it.